It was 11:51 at night. The air in my greenhouse hung heavy, smelling of wet earth and silence. My hands were buried wrist-deep in black soil, repotting a rare orchid when my phone buzzed on the bench. The screen lit up the darkness with a text from my mother. "We have discussed it. Do not come tomorrow. Garrett is high status. We cannot have you looking like the help in front of him." Seconds later, a notification popped up. My sister Chloe hearted the message. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just wiped the dirt off the screen with my thumb smearing the black soil over their names. I walked to the door and turned the heavy iron key. The era of being useful was over. Before we dig into this betrayal, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. To understand why I locked that door, you have to understand the economy of my family. They deal in facades, I deal in roots. My sister Chloe calls herself an aesthetic perfectionist. She stages high-end real estate painting over water damage and placing rented furniture in empty rooms to create an illusion of a life. I am a landscape architect. I work with soil drainage and slow growth. I create living art that breathes. For years I thought these were just different careers. I was wrong. They were different currencies. I sat down on my potting stool and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the humid dark, illuminating the rows of ferns and vines hanging above me. I pulled up my banking history. It wasn't a family history. It was a ledger of exploitation. November 3rd, $4,500 sent to Chloe for emergency staging. That was a lie. It was credit card debt she needed to clear before her wealthy boyfriend Garrett saw her statement. October 12th, $12,000 for roof repairs on my parents' house. I scrolled back 5 years. $58,000. That is what my silence cost. For a long time I wondered why I did it. Why did I pay for the paint on a house I wasn't welcome inside? Psychologists call it roll lock. It is a psychological trap where you convince yourself that your utility is your rent. You believe that if you are just useful enough, if you pay enough bills, if you fix enough messes, eventually you will purchase a ticket to love. You tell yourself that your value is transactional, so you keep paying. You think you are investing in a relationship, but you are really just paying a subscription fee to people who would cancel you the moment the check bounces. Tonight the check bounced. I didn't feel sad. I felt efficient. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I opened the browser tab for the high-end catering company scheduled to deliver Thanksgiving dinner to my parents' house tomorrow at noon. I had paid the deposit and the final balance because my mother said her liquidity was tied up. I clicked cancel. The refund policy was strict, but I didn't care about the money. I cared about the emptiness that would be sitting on their table. Next, I pulled up the delivery schedule for my own nursery. A van was set to deliver $3,000 worth of white hydrangeas and imported lilies to their doorstep at 8 a.m. to boost their curb appeal for Garrett's arrival. I deleted the order. Finally, I logged into my main bank account. I found the standing order labeled Maintenance Fund. It transferred $500 to my mother every week to keep their lawn pristine. I hovered over the delete button. My hand didn't shake. I clicked. There were no tears, there was no hesitation. I was simply closing a non-performing account. Morning light filtered through the glass roof of my greenhouse, pale and cold. It illuminated the rows of propagation trays where seedlings were just beginning to break the soil surface. I stood there with a mug of black coffee, watching the steam rise, feeling a strange, quiet power. Usually Thanksgiving morning was a frantic race against a stopwatch I didn't own. I would be at my parents' house by 6 a.m. raking leaves, arranging centerpieces, and hiding my dirt-stained hands in the kitchen while my mother critiqued my outfit. Today, the only thing I had to tend to was my coffee. Then the silence broke. My phone vibrated on the metal table, dancing against a pair of pruning shears. It was Chloe. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I wanted to hear the desperation. When I finally swiped the screen, her voice wasn't a greeting. It was a high-pitched siren of panic. "Where are the flowers?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "Good morning to you too, Chloe. Do not play games with me, Jasmine." The van didn't show up. The caterer just called and said the order was canceled. And to top it off, the storm last night blew debris all over the front walkway. There is mud on the limestone pavers. Mud, Jasmine. Garrett is going to be here in 3 hours. I listened to her spiral. It was fascinating, like watching a terrarium shatter in slow motion. For years, I had been the glue holding their glass house together. I had smoothed over every crack, paid for every upgrade, and scrubbed every stain so they could pretend their lives were effortless. Now, gravity was finally taking its turn. Mom is freaking out. Chloe continued, her voice cracking. She says the curb appeal is ruined. You need to come over right now. Bring your crew. Bring the pressure washer. You need to clear the walkway and replant the urns by the front door. I looked at my hands. They were clean. I scrubbed them last night after I locked the door. I didn't have a crew. I was the crew. I am not doing that, I said. My voice was steady, calm, foreign, even to my own ears. What do you mean? You have to. It is an emergency. It is not an emergency, Chloe. It is weather, and I am not your landscaper. There was a pause on the line, a silence so heavy it felt like the air pressure dropped. Then her voice shifted. It went from frantic to icy, the tone she used when she wanted to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. Listen to me. This lunch is crucial for my future. Garrett is an architect. He notices details. If he walks up a muddy path to a house with empty planters, I look like a fraud. You are going to come over here, you are going to fix the aesthetic, and then you are going to leave out the back gate before he pulls up. We cannot have you standing there looking like a laborer when I am trying to sell a lifestyle. The words hung in the air between us. Leave out the back gate. It wasn't a surprise. Deep down, I think I always knew. To them, I wasn't family. I was a utility. I was the plumbing, the electricity, the landscaping, essential for the house to function, but something to be hidden behind drywall and hedges. They didn't want me at the table. They just wanted the table set. The realization didn't hurt. It cauterized. It burned away the last thread of guilt I had been holding on to since I canceled the transfers. No, I said. Excuse me. No. I am not coming. I am not fixing the walkway. I am not bringing flowers. And I am certainly not leaving out the back gate of a property I have spent $58,000 maintaining. Jasmine, if you don't. Figure it out, Chloe. You are the aesthetic perfectionist. Use your vision. I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I simply pressed the red button and set it back on the table. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the glass panes of the greenhouse, but inside it was perfectly still. I picked up my watering can. The orchids needed attention, and unlike my family, they bloomed when you cared for them. 45 minutes later, the silence of my sanctuary was shattered. Not by a phone call this time, but by the violent crunch of tires on gravel. I didn't look up from my workbench. I was pruning a ficus, making microscopic cuts to shape its future growth, deciding which branches were essential and which were just drawing energy. I heard car doors slam. 4 of them. They marched into the greenhouse like an invading army, the humid air instantly fogging up their designer sunglasses. It was a visual collision that almost made me laugh. My mother was wearing pristine white cashmere, a ridiculous choice for a working nursery. Chloe was in suede heels that immediately sank into the mulch path. My father looked red-faced and tight-collared, and trailing behind them, looking like a man who had been dragged into a war zone he didn't understand, was Garrett. They had brought him as a weapon. They assumed his presence, his wealth, his status, his judgment would shame me into submission. They thought I would see him and shrink back into the role of the helpful, invisible sister. They forgot that this was my ecosystem, not theirs. Here they were, just invasive species. Jasmine, my father boomed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. You have lost your mind. You are coming with us right now. I set down my shears. I didn't stand up. I stayed on my stool, wiping my hands on a rag. Get out, I said. My mother stepped forward, her heels clicking on the stone pavers I had laid myself. Do not speak to your father that way. We have a crisis, and you are playing in the dirt. Garrett is here. Do you really want him to see you like this? She gestured at me like I was a stain on the floor. I looked at Garrett. He wasn't looking at me with disgust. In fact, he wasn't looking at me at all. He had stopped 3 feet inside the door, his eyes fixed on the propagation bench to his left. He walked past my mother. He walked past Chloe, who was vibrating with anxiety. He stopped, in front of a black hydroponic pot. Is this the Nocturne Vanda? He asked. His voice was hushed, reverent. The air in the room shifted. My parents looked confused. Chloe looked terrified. It is, I said. Garrett turned to Chloe, his brow furrowed. You told me you bought the specimen in your apartment from a breeder in Holland. You said you imported it for $5,000. Chloe opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked like a deer in headlights if the deer was wearing Balenciaga. She didn't buy it in Holland, I said, my voice cutting through the humidity. It doesn't exist in Holland. It exists here. I bred it. It is a proprietary hybrid. It took me 3 years to stabilize that variegation. I looked at my sister. My prototype went missing last month. I thought it had died. I didn't realize it had been staged. Garrett looked from the plant to Chloe. The admiration in his eyes was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard calculation. You stole it. My mother stepped between them, her hands fluttering. Oh, who cares about a plant? Garrett, we are talking about family matters. Jasmine, stop trying to distract us. We need to discuss the house repairs. Since we are discussing theft, I said, standing up finally. Let's talk about the house repairs. Or rather, let's talk about the financing. I reached under the workbench. I didn't pull out a weapon, but the effect was the same. I pulled out a thick file folder. What is that? My father asked, his face losing its flush and turning a sickly shade of gray. This is the paperwork for the $58,000 home improvement loan taken out against the property 3 years ago, I said. The one listed in my name. The one with a signature at the bottom that looks a lot like mine, but has a loop on the J that I haven't used since high school. The greenhouse went deadly silent. The only sound was the rhythmic drip of the irrigation system. You forged my signature, Dad. You took out a loan against my credit to build that deck you tell everyone you paid cash for. Jasmine, don't be dramatic, my mother hissed, glancing nervously at Garrett. We handled your finances. We were helping you build credit. You were committing fraud, I corrected, and I have the forensic analysis to prove it. Garrett took a step back, distancing himself physically from Chloe and my parents. He looked at them like they were something rotting. You people are insane, he muttered. I looked at my family. They were small. They were withered. Without my money to water them, without my silence to shade them, they were exposed for exactly what they were. Get off my property, I said, or the next conversation we have will be with a district attorney. My mother didn't flinch at the word fraud. She didn't gasp or look ashamed. Instead, she laughed a brittle, incredulous sound that bounced off the glass walls. Fraudo, Jasmine, stop it. You are embarrassing yourself. We didn't forge anything. We signed on your behalf. It's called power of attorney. We are your parents. We manage your affairs because, frankly, you are too busy playing in the mud to understand complex finances. She turned to Garrett, smoothing the front of her cashmere sweater. She's always been dramatic. We took out a small loan to improve the property value. Property she will inherit one day. Mind you, we were doing her a favor. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. If I hadn't spent the last 24 hours excavating my own spine, I might have believed her. I might have apologized for raising my voice. But the soil under my fingernails wasn't shame anymore. It was evidence. I never signed a power of attorney, I said. My voice didn't rise. It dropped, becoming as heavy and immovable as a stone. And I certainly didn't authorize you to use my credit to build a deck for parties I wasn't invited to. It's a family asset, my father shouted, stepping forward. His face was purple now, veins bulging in his neck. Everything we have is for the family. You selfish little... I didn't let him finish. I reached under the workbench again. This time I pulled out a bound book. It wasn't a digital spreadsheet. It was a physical ledger green canvas cover worn at the corners. I slammed it onto the metal table. The sound rang out like a gunshot. Let's talk about family assets, I said. I opened the book. The pages crinkled in the humid air. Inside, my handwriting was neat, precise, and damning. August 14th, 2019, I read aloud. Check number 402 to Prestige Roofing, $12,000. You told me the insurance claim was denied. It wasn't. You cashed the insurance check and used my money to pay for the roof so you could buy the boat. My father froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I turned the page. December 20th, 2020. $6,000 transfer to Chloe. Emergency tuition. Chloe wasn't in school, she was in Tulum with her friends. I looked at my sister. She was shrinking against a potting bench trying to make herself invisible behind a fern. May 5th, 2022, I continued the rhythm of the dates hitting like a hammer. $3,000. Medical bills for Dad. Dad wasn't sick. Dad wanted a new set of golf clubs and a membership at the country club so he could network. I looked up. Garrett was staring at the ledger, his expression unreadable. My mother looked like she was watching a car crash she was driving. It's not just money, I said, closing the book. It's the labor. The weekends I spent reseeding your lawn. The nights I spent pruning your hedges so you could host garden parties for people who didn't know I existed. I didn't just give you money. I gave you my life force. I looked at my mother, really looked at her. For years I had seen a giant, a matriarch, a force of nature. Now I just saw a woman in a white sweater who was afraid of being seen. Inside my chest something twisted. It was a sharp physical pain like a blade turning between my ribs. In botany, we call it pruning. When a branch is diseased, when it has been infected with blight or rot, you have to cut it off. It isn't a gentle process. You have to use sharp shears. You have to cut into living wood. The tree bleeds sap. It enters a state of shock. It feels like violence. Because it is violence. For a moment I wanted to stop. I wanted to close the ledger and say, "It's okay. I'll fix it. I'll pay the loan. Just love me." That instinct was the oldest root in my body, deep and tangled. It whispered that a diseased limb was better than no limb at all. It whispered that being used was better than being alone. But then I looked at the orchid on the bench, the nocturne vanda I had spent 3 years breeding. It was strong because I had pruned it. It was vibrant because I hadn't let the dead weight drag it down. If I didn't cut them off, the rot would kill me. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of damp earth and green growth. I let the pain be there. I let it hurt. And then, I made the cut. "The bank has already been notified about the signature discrepancy," I said. "The fraud investigator is opening a case file on Monday morning." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "You wouldn't. You would send your own father to jail." "I'm not sending anyone anywhere," I said. "I am simply correcting the record. You took the loan. You can pay it back. Or you can explain to the authorities why my name is on the paperwork." I picked up the ledger and held it to my chest. "Now," I said, "leave." Garrett was the first to move. He didn't look at my mother, who was trembling in her white cashmere, or my father, who was staring at the ledger as if it were a death certificate. He looked at Chloe. For months, Chloe had curated a version of herself for him, a version that was sophisticated, wealthy, and ethically sourced. She had built a relationship the way she staged houses with rented furniture and good lighting. Now, under the harsh fluorescent grow lights, the lease was up. "You told me you were an heiress," Garrett said. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth he had shown just minutes ago. "You told me your family funded your design firm. But you're just a thief." "Garrett, please," Chloe whimpered, reaching for his arm. "It's complicated. Families share resources. It's not what it looks like." He stepped back, dodging her touch like she was contagious. "It looks exactly like fraud. You stole her work," he pointed to the nocturne vanda, "and you stole her money." He turned to me. He didn't offer pity. He offered respect. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a heavy cardstock business card. He placed it on the metal table next to the ledger. "My firm is looking for suppliers for a new eco-hotel in Costa Rica," he said. "We need authentic botanical design. Not staging. Call me when you're ready to expand." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned on his heel and walked out of the greenhouse. The sound of his car engine revving and fading into the distance was the only funeral march my family deserved. My mother let out a sob, collapsing onto a bag of potting soil. "You ruined it," she wailed. "You ruined everything. Do you know how close we were? He was going to propose. He was going to take care of us." "No," I said. "I was taking care of you. And I quit." I pointed to the door. I didn't need to shout. The authority in my voice was absolute, rooted deep in the ground I stood on. "Get out. If you aren't off my driveway in 2 minutes, I'm calling the sheriff to file the report on that loan immediately." They scrambled. There was no dignity in their exit. My father had to half carry my mother and Chloe. Stumbled behind them, her heels ruined by the mud. Her perfect life dissolving into the gray November afternoon. When the taillights disappeared, the silence returned to the greenhouse. It wasn't lonely. It was clean. I didn't watch them burn in the weeks that followed. I just stopped watering them. And like any parasitic organism cut off from its host, the rot set in quickly. The wilt started with the house. Without my weekly $500 transfer, the landscaping crew stopped coming. The pristine Kentucky bluegrass my father prized turned yellow and patchy within a month. The winter storms came, and without the $12,000 I had refused to pay, the roof leak went from a drip to a deluge. I heard through the grapevine that they tried to list the house in January. They wanted to downsize to cash out before the bank noticed the loan payments were missing. But you can't stage a house that has foundational damage. The inspection report was brutal. They were underwater on a mortgage they had refinanced 3 times to pay for cars and vacations, and the $58,000 home improvement loan, the one with the forged signature, was a lien that froze the sale. I sat down with the fraud investigator 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. I didn't cover for them. I didn't soften the blow. I simply slid the green ledger across the desk and said, "That is not my signature." The consequences were mechanical, accounts were frozen, credit scores were decimated, my father's golf club membership was revoked. My mother's social circle, sensing the scent of failure and scandal, pruned her from the guest lists. Chloe fared no better. Without Garrett's arm to hang on to and without my money to cover her credit card bills, her aesthetic crumbled. She tried to pivot to lifestyle influencing, posting photos of a luxury life she no longer had access to. The internet is a cruel place for fakes. It took less than a week for someone to expose that her Parisian loft was a backdrop in a rented studio. She went silent. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the satisfaction of a balanced equation. My greenhouse, however, was thriving. I used the money I wasn't sending them to upgrade my irrigation system. I hired 2 assistants. I signed the contract with Garrett's firm, strictly professional, strictly lucrative. One evening late in February, I was scrubbing my hands at the sink. The water ran clear, swirling down the drain. I looked at my skin. It was rough. It was stained with chlorophyll and rich, dark earth. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to hide my hands. They were dirty, but they were finally clean. It has been 12 months since I closed the green ledger. I am standing in the middle of 5 acres of land I bought with the profits from the Costa Rica contract. It isn't a manicured lawn. There is no Kentucky bluegrass here, no imported boxwoods forced into geometric shapes, no white picket fences trying to hold back the chaos. It is a meadow. It is wild, untamed, and riotously alive. Goldenrod and milkweed fight for space with native grasses. Bees hum in the air. A collective vibration that feels like the earth breathing. It is messy. It is chaotic. And to my mother, it would look like a disaster. She would see weeds. She would see a lack of control. But I see an ecosystem. I see roots that go deep enough to survive a drought without someone else watering them. For 28 years, I thought I was the weed in their garden. I thought I was the unwanted element that disrupted their aesthetic. I tried to trim myself down. I tried to be smaller, quieter, cleaner. I poured my resources into their soil, hoping that if I fed them enough, they would finally let me bloom. But I realized something out here, watching the wind move through the tall grass. I wasn't the weed. I was the nutrient. They were the parasites. They didn't have their own root systems. They couldn't draw water from the ground or energy from the sunday. They could only survive by wrapping themselves around me and sucking me dry. Cutting them off wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of photosynthesis. I stopped giving my light to dead things. I know there are people listening to this right now who feel like I did. You are the ones who fix the problems you didn't create. You are the ones who pay the bills for houses you don't own. You are the ones who are called difficult or selfish the moment you stop being useful. You are the wildflowers growing in concrete. They tell you that you are too much. They tell you that you are messy, that your emotions are inconvenient, that your hands are too dirty. They try to prune you back until you are nothing but a stump they can use as a stepping stool. I am here to tell you, do not let them. Your wildness is not a flaw, it is your survival strategy. Your refusal to fit into their pot is not a failure. It is your roots seeking deeper ground. It is terrifying to be the one who leaves. It is terrifying to look at the people who raised you, or the people you grew up with, and say, no more. You will feel guilt. You will feel the phantom pain of the limb you severed. You will wonder if you are the villain in their story. You probably are. Let them tell that story. Let them paint you as the bad guy while they wither in the shade you left behind. You have a garden to grow. I knelt down in the dirt. It was cool and damp against my knees. I dug a small hole with my trowel, the metal slicing easily through the rich, dark soil. I placed a seed inside. It wasn't an orchid. It wasn't something rare or expensive or fragile. It was an oak acorn, something slow, something solid. Something that would stand for 100 years, taking up space, casting a shadow unmovable and undeniable. I covered it with dirt and patted it down. I didn't need to pressure wash the walkway. I didn't need to stage the scene. I just needed to let it grow. My phone was in my pocket, silent. No demands. No emergencies. Just the quiet potential of a future that belonged entirely to me. I stood up and brushed the soil from my jeans, leaving the dust there as a badge of honor. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across my field. It was beautiful, and for the first time it was real. If you have ever had to prune your own family tree to survive, share your story in the comments. And subscribe for the next chapter.